Tonight on the show, is China abandoning Pakistan? After Operation Sindoor, the iron bond between China and Pakistan seems to have rusted. Why is that? And why won't China mess with India over Pakistan? Good evening, you are watching TKC World, where we make sense of the global events with straight facts and sharp analysis. Also on the show, we decode Canada's new immigration policy and understand why Canada is turning away from Indian students. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Netanyahu slams UK, France and Canada for their recent criticism of Israel's Gaza offensive. Has Prime Minister Netanyahu been diplomatically cornered? Also, Trump blocks foreign students at Harvard, what it means for Indians and foreign students in America. And finally, a new lineup on TKC World where I will review and recommend a movie or a web series every Friday that you must watch over the weekend. And this week's pick is Final Destination Bloodlines. All this is lined up, let's get started. Recently, India and Pakistan were once again on the edge of a war. A deadly terror attack in Kashmir set things off and India responded with strength, launching Operation Sindoor. And the result? Pakistan quickly backed off and sought a ceasefire. And as a result, all eyes turned to China, with questions like, would it back its old buddy Pakistan? Would it criticize India? Would it jump into the chaos between India and Pakistan? Well, the short answer is something that Pakistan would not have expected and wanted. Despite its so-called iron brother relationship with Pakistan, China is walking a tightrope and is not in the mood to mess with India over Pakistan. Dear viewers, now this is a serious and sudden shift in China's foreign policy, and because both Pakistan and China are India's troubled neighbors, it is important to decode the intricacies of the story. Friends, we have to understand China's number one priority isn't loyalty. It never was. It is business. And India is big business. The two countries trade nearly 140 billion US dollars every year. India is one of China's top export markets and a crucial player in global manufacturing, especially as companies start to shift away from China. Now, supporting Pakistan in a terror-linked conflict will put all that at risk. China knows it, that it cannot afford to lose India as a trade partner, especially with its own economy struggling and global markets getting shaky. Now, do you remember Galwan in 2020 when Indian and Chinese soldiers clashed in Himalayas? That moment shocked the world and it shocked Chinese businesses as well. India banned dozens of Chinese apps and made it harder for Chinese companies to operate here in India. Now, it wasn't just a slap on the wrist, it was a warning, a very big warning for China. If things heat up again, China knows India will retaliate not just militarily but economically as well. And Beijing doesn't want another round of that because it itself is in a vulnerable position. China wants to be seen as the leader of the global south, the voice of developing nations. But how can it claim to support peace and stability if it openly supports terrorism? Helping Pakistan in an armed conflict would make China look like a bully, and many countries would turn their backs on China. Also, China has poured billions and billions into Pakistan's infrastructure through China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or known as in short form CPEC. But guess what? Many of those projects are under threat, not from India, but from violence inside Pakistan itself. Chinese workers have been attacked. Really, they have been attacked. Instability is a growing risk. A war with India would only make things worse. So instead of encouraging a conflict, China wants calm to protect its own investments and avoid any further crises in Pakistan. Now, publicly, China talks about peace. Behind closed doors, it does just enough to keep Pakistan happy, like blocking United Nations sanctions against terror groups. But it stops short of going all in. Do you know what it is? It is classic strategic ambivalence, which means just enough support to stay in the game, but not enough to get burnt. Even Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif recently told Beijing that they will try to stop terror attack on their soil or from their soil. And that is a big shift and shows China might be pushing Pakistan to behave itself. But here is the wild card. India is getting closer to the United States, especially through the Quad and a possible India-US trade deal. China doesn't want India falling deeper into the Washington's camp. That would tilt the entire Asian balance. So by staying neutral, China hopes to keep India from locking arms too tightly with the West, especially with the United States. The bottom line here is that while China-Pakistan friendship might look ironclad, it's more like a pressure cooker with a delicate valve. Beijing is playing a careful game, support Pakistan just enough to maintain ties, but not enough to damage its own relationship with our country India. But at the end of the day, China's loyalty isn't to Pakistan. As I mentioned, it is to its own interest. And right now, those interests say, don't mess up with India. Imagine packing your bags, saying goodbye to your friends and dreaming of studying in Canada, but only to be told, sorry, we are full. That's the reality thousands of Indian students are now facing as Canada pulls the brake on study visas. But the question is, why is one of the world's most immigrant-friendly countries suddenly tightening the doors? In the first quarter of 2025, Canada issued just 30,640 study permits to Indian students. Now, it is a 31% massive drop compared to same time last year. And that's not a one-off dip. This is part of a much bigger policy shift happening in Canada. Canada has been quietly reshaping, or I would say reimagining its immigration approach for a couple of years now. Back in 2023, it issued over 6,81,000 study permits, with Indians making up to the largest chunk, more than 2,78,000. But by 2024, the total fell to 5,16,000, and now in 2025, it's being slashed further. The new cap, just 4,37,000 permits across the board. What's the reason for this? Well, the reason isn't political tensions with China, at least not directly. The real trigger lies within Canada itself, a looming housing crisis, overloaded healthcare, and strained public transport. Cities like Toronto and Vancouver are bustling at the seams, and locals are feeling the pressure. New Prime Minister of Canada, Mark Carney, is responding to that domestic pressure in terms of these new immigration policies. He's made a big promise that temporary residents, including foreign students and workers, won't exceed 5% of Canada's total population by year 2028. That is a massive shift in policy for a country once known for welcoming immigrants. Getting a study visa for Canada is now getting much tougher. Here is what students need to prove. Acceptance from a designated learning institute, not just any college. The ability to pay tuition, rent, and living expenses, including those for any family member tagging along. That is a big shift. A clean criminal record with compliances with Canadian laws, good health, and a medical exam may be required. And most importantly, a commitment, a real commitment to leave Canada once the permit expires. These aren't just minor tweaks, they fundamentally change who gets in and who doesn't. Now the question is, why will this shift in Canada's immigration policy hit India the hardest? Well, Indian students have traditionally been the backbone, a literal backbone of India's international student community. Let me give you some data. 41% of all international students in 2022 were Indians. For many families, Canadian education was the golden ticket to quality education, work opportunities, and a pathway to permanent residency. Now that dreams seems to have shattered or fallen out of the reach. So is Canada closing its door? Not entirely, but it's certainly becoming more selective regarding who gets in and who don't. As housing and infrastructure struggles continue, immigration policy is being reshaped to serve Canadians first. For Indian students, this is a wake-up call that the world of study visas is changing fast, and it is time to start looking for alternatives. A few days back on this show, we told you how Israel's key allies were starting to turn away, that political goodwill in geopolitics is not infinite, and now that situation has escalated dramatically. In a fiery video message, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu launched a stunning verbal attack on three of Israel's closest allies. Guess who are these allies? The United Kingdom, France, and Canada. And who was his target? Their leaders, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer of the United Kingdom, President Emmanuel Macron of France, and the newly elected Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. Netanyahu accused them of siding with quote-unquote mass murderers, rapists, baby killers, and kidnappers, referring to Hamas, and said their criticism of Israel's Gaza offensive meant that they have chosen quote-unquote the wrong side of humanity, the wrong side of justice, and the wrong side of the history itself. So the question is, what triggered this outburst from Prime Minister Netanyahu? Well, it comes after all these three countries issued a rare, coordinated condemnation of Israel's expanded military campaign in Gaza, calling it quote-unquote disproportionate and labeling the humanitarian crisis as intolerable. For context, this is the strongest public rebuke of Israel's action from these allies since the war began in October 2023. The UK even suspended trade talks while Starmer called Israel's decision to allow only a trickle of humanitarian aid into Gaza quote-unquote utterly inadequate. And this isn't just a diplomatic friction anymore. It is rapidly turning into a diplomatic rift. But here is the irony, dear viewers. Just 19 months ago, these very countries had stood firmly with Israel after the horrific October 7 Hamas-led attacks that killed over 1,200 people and led to the kidnapping of more than 250 other civilians. Now, as the civilian death toll in Gaza surpasses 53,000, including over 16,000 children, according to Hamas-run health authorities, the same allies are demanding Israel change its course of action. Aid agencies say the region is on a brink of famine. An 11-week total blockade had choked off supplies. Only 98 trucks were allowed in recently, and that's far below what is needed. Adding fuel to that fire was a recent shooting in Washington, D.C., where 2 Israeli embassy staff members were killed. And the attacker reportedly shouted, quote-unquote, "Free Palestine," as he was arrested by the authorities. Now, while leaders like Starmer condemned the act and anti-Semitism more broadly, Netanyahu saw their criticism of Israeli policy as a betrayal of their ally and friendship. But even within Israel, cracks are showing. Their former prime minister in a BBC interview described Netanyahu's governments as a gang of thugs, quote unquote. He said their policies in Gaza were close to a war crime. It is a harsh assessment, a harsh statement, one echoed by others who believe Israel's response to Hamas has crossed many lines under international humanitarian law. So what does this mean going forward for Israel? Well, Israel now finds itself increasingly isolated diplomatically on a global stage. Its most trusted friends are beginning to raise moral and legal red flags. Netanyahu, however, is doubling down and he is choosing defiance over diplomacy, but we have seen that never works. But whether this stance strengthens Israel's security or alienates it further on the world stage, on the global stage, remains to be seen. In geopolitical alliances, may be built on a shared value, but they are tested by actions. And Israel's actions are not the ones that would keep these alliances intact. Imagine spending your entire life preparing to enter one of the world's most prestigious universities, the Harvard University. You finally made it, but just when your dream began, it shatters with a single government order. That's what nearly 6,800 international students at Harvard, including 788 Indians, are now facing after the Trump administration delivered a stunning blow. On May 22nd, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem announced that Harvard University's certification to enroll international students will be revoked for the academic year 2025-26. Now, what does this mean? This means no new international admissions and current students must transfer or lose their legal status. That is what this order means. This is the latest chapter in Trump's war with Harvard University, a feud that began the moment he returned to the White House for his second presidency. The administration accuses the Ivy League schools of harboring anti-Semitic and anti-American sentiments, even going far as to claim Harvard is protecting quote-unquote pro-terrorist alligators and collaborating with Chinese Communist Party. This is the allegation on Harvard University. Harvard's alleged refusal to share video and audio records of international students involved in protest is the reason behind this new conflict or new chapter in this conflict. NIOM gave the authorities 72 hours to comply, calling the action a warning to all US institutions. Harvard fired back, calling the decision unlawful and retaliatory, and said it threatens to cause serious harm, not just to the American university, but to the complete American academic and research leadership and freedom. But behind the headlines and legal threats lies a quieter devastation, and that is for students, especially Indian students. The consequences are enormous. Right now, nearly 800 Indian students have enrolled in Harvard. Many of them are midway through their degrees. If this decision holds in the court, definitely they're going to sue the government, the Harvard. They are either have to scramble to find new college, new school, leave the US altogether. These are the two options that they have. And it's not just about education anymore. Indian students, like many other international students, pay full tuition, often contributing over 70 to 70 lakhs when you include the cost of housing or other living costs. For the United States, international students add more than $44 billion annually to the economy. That is a big number. Harvard alone fuels thousands and thousands of jobs in the city, from research labs to restaurants. In short, this is not just a Harvard problem. It is a national ripple with global consequences, global impact. Many students are calling this move devastating. Faculty members are stunned. Former Obama advisor and Harvard University professor Jensen Furman said, "This is horrendous on every level. It weakens American innovation, our economy, and our global leadership." This is what this professor said. So the bigger question now is, Harvard has a ticking clock. It can still reverse decision by handing over protest records, but if it doesn't, and this sets a precedent for other US universities as well, for what could happen next if they do not comply with the government. That means foreign students everywhere, including from India, might soon be reconsidering whether the United States is still the land or the heaven of educational opportunities. This story is still unfolding, but one thing is crystal clear: the cost of politics is being paid by students. The question is, how far will it go? Before I wrap up today's show, there is something new I'm adding to your Fridays, a movie or a web series recommendation. Because let's face it, let's be honest, with the hundreds and hundreds of options out there, sometimes it is harder to pick a movie than to watch one. So starting today, every Friday, I will share one title that stood out to me, and maybe it will help you find your next weekend binge watch. And this week's pick is Final Destination Bloodlines. I watched it and I have really enjoyed it. Now, if you're a fan of this franchise, you know the formula. A character has a premonition of a horrific accident, they try to cheat death, and then one by one, death comes back for each one of them in interestingly absurd and creative ways. It's been 14 years since the last Final Destination film came out, but Bloodlines returned with the same chaotic energy, same sleek visuals, and absurdly same entertaining kills that fans absolutely love and admire. No need for masked killers or supernatural demons, because in this movie here, death itself is a villain. Because you cannot see it, you cannot stop it, and you definitely cannot survive it unless you know how to cheat fate, but then fate finds a way to cheat you back. So this equation equates itself. This time the chaos begins in 1960s, high above a swanky restaurant called Skyview, where a young woman named Iris starts seeing warning signs. What are these signs? A shaky chandelier, flaming dishes, a cracked glass door floor. All these innocent things become part of a wild, deadly chain reaction that kicks off this film. But it turns out this horrific event was just a nightmare, a vision haunting her granddaughter Stephanie decades later. And as Stephanie digs deeper, she realizes that everyone her grandmother saved on that day is now dying in the order they were originally meant to die. And that includes her own family members. And then what follows is a tense, creative, and at times hilarious series of death-defying setups. We're talking about tattoo parlors, MRI machines, peanut allergies, and of course the classic backyard BBQ. What makes Final Destination films so entertaining is how they make ordinary objects terrifying. A beer bottle, a rake, a hose, all potential death traps if you look close enough. So when I came home, I was really frightened. You never know when that will strike, the tensions build, your heart races, and then sometimes it is just a fallout or a fake out. Sure, the climax is a bit underwhelming, even me and my friends agree to that, and some characters could use more depth. So if you are in the mood for a smart, suspenseful, fun with a nostalgic twist, Final Destination Bloodlines is worth a watch. And that's all I have for you on the show tonight, dear viewers. Now I will see you on Monday. Until then, take care, good night, and have a great weekend.